Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Just before I walked into this room, a number of people talked to me and said how much passion and energy is amongst this crowd, and I can feel it. It is truly a privilege to welcome you all this afternoon to this very special event of East-West, the Art of Dialogue. I want to extend a sincere thank you for all of you being here this afternoon. And I want to extend a special thank you for those of you who have traveled from far places, from Cairo, from Dubai, from London, from California, and from New York. And I apologize if I've missed anyone. But I also want to extend a very special thank you to Hussein Fahmy, who has been a big supporter of this initiative, traveling to London, to Cairo, to New York, to Washington, and he just arrived from New York yesterday, the day before from Cairo. I appreciate your devotion to this initiative. Let me take a few minutes, if I may, just to provide a background to what we're trying to achieve, and also to give you my personal sort of inspiration of how all this happened. Little did I realize that circumstances that happened very long time ago would be the founding inspiration of the initiative of today. Many, many moons ago, when I was 16, my late father called me to his study, and he said, "Shafiq, this is your last allowance." At that time, I thought he was joking, but he really wasn't. I was hungry for travel and discovery, and for those of you who remember, in the late 60s, Egypt just came out of war. And I started a messaging service across the city of Cairo. After saving $148, I got on deck of a ship and I crossed to Piraeus, spent 48 days with $148 hitchhiking across Europe. I made a lot of friends, I learned a lot. Some of these friends I still know till today. Another such experience is when I landed in New York for the very first time as a young entrepreneur. That was in 1980. I came here thinking I would try and find a general contractor to bid on a power plant in Egypt. I spent 5 days in New York thinking I would do that. I got nowhere. I still remember going to Rockefeller Center, sitting on the telex machine. Many of you have not seen a telex machine, at least the fellows haven't. And sitting in that room and banging for hours to communicate, but I got nowhere. I decided I'm not going to leave without getting that bit together. So I ended up going to places around the United States, such as Rensselaer, Indiana, Des Moines, Iowa, Terre Haute, Indiana, Monticello, Arkansas, and Appleton, Wisconsin. And I put the bit together. Went back to Cairo, put the proposal, and I won that contract. But more importantly than the contract, I truly got introduced to America and Americans. And I found that an extremely enlightening proposition for me, who had never been to the United States before. Even though during that trip, I used something that no longer exists called Allegheny Airlines. I lost all my luggage on Allegheny Airlines. But for me, that was a huge privilege for me to understand what America is all about. And if I could say this, America is not New York, Washington, and Los Angeles. There's a lot about America. And for me, it's been a privilege to have learned that and to have been coming again and again since that time. It also was clear to me how important and mutually beneficial Egyptian-American relations would be, not only on a bilateral basis, but even beyond that. And as a constant bridge builder, I saw that as much as we are today digitally connected by phones, Blackberries, Skype, everything else, that is not enough. We may be connected, but in many cases, we really do not understand each other. And in the world we live in today, constant change that is happening, increased speed and connectivity, increased technology, and huge challenges of misperception and stereotyping, and in many cases being unable to differentiate between fact and fiction, All of this is very real, and in many cases can have dangerous consequences. I was talking to an American politician recently, and I asked him, why not take a deeper dive in my part of the world? And he was very nice. We had this conversation for about 40 minutes. And at the end, he was honest enough to turn to me and say, you have to understand three things. He said, with all what's happening in the world, we have short concentration span. This has become the norm. Then he turned to me and said, in the past, when a crisis happened, we used to, as politicians, have a couple of days to deal with it. Now, we have minutes to deal with it. A reporter will come up and stick a microphone, and in many cases, we don't have the details. But what is more dangerous is that in many cases, we have to take decisions that are based with insufficient knowledge. And these all sounded to me as very dangerous paths that could lead to tension, stress, and more conflict than understanding. And I don't think anyone in this room would disagree that there is a huge need for more understanding. And that, in my world, in the world of investment and business, unless we have understanding and a win-win formula, we don't have any success. The danger always is zero-sum, which is very short-lived. That is why it has become my deep conviction that better understanding means a better world. We won't solve all our problems by better communication, but I'm sure that if there is no better communication, we will definitely not solve the problems. My generation has yet to succeed in being able to have a better East-West communication. Many of you in this room have invested a huge amount of time and effort to do that. I remember fondly, I'm an art collector, and one of the great things I enjoy is paintings by American painters and West European painters that came to my part of the world in the 18th and 19th century. They did not fly united. They took 6 to 8 weeks to get to my part of the world. They landed, there was no photography. So they landed in an unknown land. They came carrying their canvases, their paint, and their brushes, and they wanted to paint. But before they could do that, not speaking the language, they had to understand the customs, they had to understand the traditions, they had to communicate and understand the people so that they could succeed in doing what they were doing. I see these people as very early globalists. As Hussein Fahmy calls them, they were the newsreels of the 18th and 19th century. And back then, there was a much better perception of both the East and West than it is today, with all the methodology of communication that we have. I personally believe that today, more than ever before, we need more understanding, and I'm happy that my family's foundation is contributing to that in a small way. The East-West, the Art of Dialogue initiative brings young emerging leaders from my part of the world and the US in an intensive, very intensive exchange. The only complaint both the Americans and Egyptians complained about is how intensive the program was. But I had no sympathy for them. They are young enough, and the opportunity, I think, and they'll speak about it, was unique. Together, the fellows, Egyptians and Americans, worked together in Egypt in June of this year and in the United States in October, not only to learn about each other, but also to develop various paths of understanding and to create collaborative projects that they'll talk about. That makes this initiative sustainable, and it has an impact beyond the exchange itself. Plus, the foundation is going to work with the young fellows to create follow-up initiatives, such as, for example, internship in the US Congress, internship in the Egyptian Parliament. That would create understanding. And another one, which we hope we will be able to do, would be in the area of media. Now, some of you asked me tonight, is this a fundraising event? No, it is not a fundraising event, but it is a knowledge awareness event. And as we move forward in the program, I'm very pleased that an Egyptian woman walked up to me in London and said, you know what, I'm so impressed about this program, I want 3 Egyptian women to join this program, which I'll sponsor. Then when we were in New York, a gentleman from Westchester did the very same thing. But let me not steal the key focus of this meeting, and that is the fellows. I would like at this time to ask three very dear friends of mine to come to the stage with 6 fellows, and they will lead this meeting. First, Tom Friedman, if I can see where he is, because I can't. Here he is. Tom Friedman does not need any introduction, ladies and gentlemen, but he's a dear friend, an American who has a deep understanding of East-West, having lived in the East, having a family here in the West, and having a huge insight in many things that ordinary people do not see. I also would like to ask Jim Zorbi, an Arab American who has devoted his entire life in building bridges between my part of the world and the United States, and I'm very pleased that we're collaborating with his institute in making this happen. Our hopes and plans, and he always tells me do not be overambitious, is I would love to see 5,000 Americans and 5,000 Egyptians in this program. I won't have you do it in 1 year. I'll give you a little bit more. And also, I would like to ask Dan Shapiro, my third friend over here, who's from Harvard, who's going to moderate this session, and the 6 fellows that are going to sit on the stage. May you all please welcome my 3 friends and the 6 fellows.
My name's Dan Shapiro, and let me start by simply saying that it is a tremendous honor to be here today with all of you, our distinguished guests, our distinguished panel, and the set of panelists as well who are on the sidelines. As I was listening to you talk, Shafiq, you'll see that I don't think this was on purpose, but we have the East and the West here, and it's nicely symbolic because there's a combination of Egyptian and Americans on both East and West. So for starters, I'm going to briefly frame what to expect today, then we're going to jump right in. And for starters, I was somehow reminded quite recently of a conversation that Shafiq and I had a number of years back. I believe it was in Davos, Switzerland, and Shafiq was talking about his personal family history. And I recalled that his father was a diplomat. And that somehow has stuck with me because I think it must run in the blood. Although Shafiq is not a governmental diplomat, I think you really exemplify the essence of a diplomat, someone who is constantly working, both professionally and very personally with a project like this, to build personal relations, better personal relations. And I think that's what this project really represents. So the purpose of today is almost precisely that. It's how can we further broaden our understanding of East and West, what quote-unquote the Arab world and the West. How do we improve communication and ultimately mutual understanding? I'm going to start by very briefly framing the context for our conversation. Then we will move to a conversation with really the stars of the day with the Gaber Fellows. Then after that, after about 20, 25 minutes of that conversation, we will hear from our distinguished, suppose we could call you elder statesmen, observers of the world, Tom and Jim. We'll move from there to a Q&A. And then finally, what I think will be one of the highlights of tonight, you will hear a sneak preview of 6 action projects that these fellows have put together, investing both creative energy and ultimately positive spirit, but wonderfully creative ideas. And then after that, and then we'll close this formal session. So with that packed schedule, let me just give a very brief framing for our conversation today. I was struck by a conversation that I recently had back at my home institution. We had invited a set of Chinese diplomats, very successful negotiators. They'd actually just come from D.C., and they had negotiated quite successfully. And we're at the Harvard Negotiation Project. Our interest is always in learning, what did you do? How did you negotiate so successfully? And their lead spokesperson said, well, you know what we did. I said, what did you do? He said, well, we started by understanding culture. We spent nearly a week thinking through culture. And we then said, well, wow, you spent a week thinking about the American culture. And they said, no. We spent a week thinking about our own culture. And later on, I connected that to this fellowship program. But I think really the learning here is dual. It's learning about the other, as you'll hear, but probably more important and of higher impact, it's learning about oneself. So with that, let us now move to our discussion with our 6 fellows. And just for starters, if you wouldn't mind each introducing yourself, just 30 seconds, 1 minute, your name, a sentence or two of your background, And what drew you to this fellowship program?
Hello, everyone. I'm Reem Suleiman from Alexandria, Egypt. I studied architecture, and now I'm an art and design school teacher. I teach young girls and boys so that they can have the ability to go to some Cambridge University program. And I do my own art projects. I have my own band, my own short movies, and my own theater projects. And why I came here to this fellowship is that I felt that this is what I'm looking for. It was a huge opportunity. I had a dream, and I went after it. I found myself writing lots and lots of ideas for action projects, and here I am.
Thank you. Please.
My name is Mu'taz Hussein. I am from Alexandria, Egypt, and I live in Cairo. I made my LLM degree in Business International Law from Indiana University School of Law, Indianapolis program in Egypt. I'm a social activist too. I used to make youth development projects since 2005. And of course, it is my honor to be a part of this outstanding fellowship. And I'm now recharging my battery, and I'll be back to Egypt with many projects and ideas. And thank you.
Hi, my name is Beth Cartier. I'm from outside of Boston, one of the two proud Bostonians here today. I was actually working in New York. My background's in IR, and now I'm getting into tech. And I was pointed in the direction of this fellowship, and it just sounded like an amazing opportunity. I mean, Egypt is just so, it's an integral part of the global community. So I applied and somehow was accepted, and it's been an absolute honor, and I've learned something every day. Thank you.
My name is Amr Ismail. I am from Alexandria. I am a human rights activist. I always believe that there's a lack of information between US and Egypt, and I thought that this program is one step to end the gap between understanding between the East and West. And frankly speaking, when I applied, I thought that it's a long shot, that probably there is someone better, but apparently they choose me, and I'm here. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Noha Eid. I work as a graphic designer for one of the well-known Egyptian newspaper called Al-Masri Al-Yom. Actually, I did apply for this program because I felt like it's not only opportunity to understand other people and other culture, but for me it was opportunity to meet myself in other creatures and other figures, other human beings and other environment. And really it's fascinating for me what I have seen and what I have accepted, not only accepting and interacting with these people, the American friends, but actually accepting me and accepting who I am as a human being. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Sullivan from the Cradle of Liberty in Boston, Massachusetts. I spent my career working in the House of Representatives in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as an aide and chief of staff to the Dean of the House, and do a lot of volunteer work with the United Nations Association of the United States in the Boston chapter and across the country. And my aspiration to serve in this fellowship was bent on my deep belief that citizen diplomacy and the role of citizen diplomats will be the global peacemakers for the 21st century. And I very much wanted to carry that mantle as a young leader in the United States and join my Egyptian counterparts in doing the same. So thank you very much for being here with us tonight.
What's the basic architecture of the program? What does that actually mean? Could you give us just what the architecture of the program looks like, a snapshot?
We're a cadre of 10 Egyptians and 10 Americans from the ages of 24 to 35. And we're seeking to realize the vision that Mr. Gaber had laid out, to be on a new frontier of discovery, following the footsteps of those thinkers and artists who traversed the mighty Atlantic in the 18th and 19th centuries, and much easier for us to do so on jet planes today, but still reaching out and trying to discover each other's differences and explore our commonalities. And I think what we've really done is get in touch with our shared humanity, learning about each other's lives and where we come from, the aspirations that we have for our futures, and the struggles that our generation is going through in tumultuous times. So we traveled in June to Egypt for 2.5 weeks, just before the June 30th events. And we traveled to Cairo, to Alexandria, and to Luxor. We toured many of the sites and saw many of the sounds and beauties of Egypt, met with political leaders, academics, public intellectuals, artists, doctors, fashion designers. It was an extraordinary trip. And then the Egyptian Fellows have had the chance to come here to the United States, arriving a couple weeks ago. We've traveled to New York City, to New Haven, to Atlanta, to Leesburg, Virginia, and now here we are in our nation's capital of Washington, D.C., doing the same thing, meeting with the folks who are making the decisions that are leading this new century, and trying to continue to explore our friendships and build trust amongst each other.
Great. And one of the unique elements of the program, as I understand it, is that the Americans, prior to this program, had never been to Egypt, and vice versa. The Egyptians had never been to the United States. What's been your experience with the program?
The most surprising thing is the common struggles between the Egyptian and the American youth.
The commonalities, you said?
Yes, common struggles. And you can say the middle class in general, the American and the Egyptian middle class. I was surprised that there is a problem of unemployment here. In Egypt, we used to have those guys who were having postgraduates and PhD and masters and still couldn't be able to find a suitable job. And I was surprised to find this here also in the US. So also in terms of education and to what extent you can get the opportunity for a good scholarship or a good educational program that is matching the market needs. This was really very common. In addition to the emotional comments between us as Egyptians and Americans in our struggling in life, in getting a good job, in establishing a family. So it was the real meaning of globalization when we see that however the different places we live in, but we share the same struggles, the same objectives, the same dreams. And it was a good start for better understanding to our countries in economic terms and in political terms.
Great. Others? Yes.
I mean, it's been an amazing way to learn about a different culture. When you spend as much time as we did on a bus in Cairo traffic, you spend a lot of time, first getting to know each other and then eventually getting to be comfortable enough where you're fighting with each other and you're really having the discussions that you wouldn't have otherwise, and you still have to go to dinner with them that night and breakfast the next morning. So you really do we just learn so much about each other. I know we keep hitting that, but you really have spent so much time together. You have the discussions that aren't necessarily happening on the front page of the newspapers, aren't really happening in context. You get the context. You get sort of how everything works together, I think, on both sides of it. So it's been an amazing textual.
Actually, what I did realize here in U.S. that the States here, it's like a platform where everyone has an opportunity to grow. And actually the diversity of the society here is really impressive. And how all of these people coming from different backgrounds can work together and be like a one unit and work for one state. It's really interesting thing for me. The culture actually here, because of this, so many people who came in from a different backgrounds are really rich. Because you till now, I heard Spanish in the streets maybe more than I heard English. I met Indian people. I met people are coming from Arab backgrounds as well. It's really amazing how you can meet the whole world in one state. It's really fascinating.
What did you expect, honestly? Before you came here, it sounds like there was surprises in terms of what you saw.
Well, I know before that, there's a diversity here in the States, but I wasn't really sure about that people are actually accepting each other and they can really work with each other. But what I found was really impressive for me.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think that the most important kind of lesson that there's a difference between the political agenda for the country or the government and the people's emotions toward each other. I think that at the end of the day, we all want to have good education, good health system, and we all want to have good money at the bank. So I feel that we crossed the Atlantic Ocean just to meet reflections of ourselves.
I mostly was impressed by, as I was just saying, some people I met outside. I was mostly impressed by the reaction of the faces when anyone knows that I'm Egyptian. I had this thought when I came here that I was like partially afraid to say to whom I'm buying something from someone that I'm Egyptian. I don't know how he's gonna react, but I was impressed how people are welcoming and friendly, and they keep on having this friendly conversation with you. So this leads you to knowing that there are lots of misconceptions happening between the two societies, and I don't know why these misconceptions are happening, but the people, they don't think yet that I'm not suspicious. I'm not like as I thought I would. Nobody asked me about terrorism or religions or anything like that. They were actually, oh, Egypt, I really want to go there and things like that. But they were most surprised, as me and Amr were saying, that I'm not wearing a galabiya and I'm not on a camel. So that was for their surprise. But I was really surprised by how friendly they met the fact that there are Egyptians in the streets and they are meeting people and they are having friendly conversations with them. That was so impressive for me, and it made me feel, as Noha said, that the community here is able to live like we are very different, but we are all the same. And this what mostly impressed me.
I know when I came back from Egypt, so many people in my office kept stopping by and saying, oh my gosh, you went to Egypt, like what was it like? The amount of curiosity there. No one asked about the camels. No one thought people were on camels. I want to get that in there too. But really, it's just people were so curious, like what's actually going on over there? There was so much interest in really people trying to understand what's going on, which was fascinating to me.
And on either side, the American or the Egyptian, you brought out the notion of fears. I'm anxious that when I talk with other people, they're going to think, oh, if I'm hearing you correctly, Arab must be terrorist or Egyptian, whatever it might be. Did others walk in with fears like that or anxieties, expectations about how others saw you that were either confirmed, for better or worse, or disconfirmed?
Well, for me, those fears just disappeared as soon as I put my leg in New York.
Okay.
Because I found lots of people and everybody is going to their work or doing something. Nobody is actually, as I expected, will ask me or will look at me in a way that I will feel that I'm different or that I cannot indulge with them.
Actually, fear was not on our agenda at all, because all the selected candidates for the fellowship are very intellectual, and they prepared themselves well before joining the program, reading and preparing, and it was very friendly, and we frankly speak in whatever sensitive topic you can imagine, in religion, in politics, in whatever. I was not having this kind of fear at all, even with the guests we met in Egypt or in the US, political groups, economic groups, media agencies, whatever. We frankly speak, we professionally speak, and it is an objective speaking. We need to reach some kind of understanding. We need to have common projects, and it was a positive attitude in general.
I think that we came here to vanquish fear, in a sense. That we came here to give informations about Egyptians, to give a little bit of how do we think and how do we act. So I agree with Mu'taz that there was no fear.
They used to say to us that you will have this culture shock when you came to US, but actually I think that I will have this culture shock when I back to Egypt. Because actually I didn't see anything really different. There is differences, but the most important is you know that people are accepting you. So you don't have this fear of representing what you think about. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really felt any fear since I came here, because I know that I am in an environment that I can express myself freely, and I know that the other side are so accepting and respectful. Whatever his opinion, her or his opinion, are different than mine, it's okay. We can listen to each other, accepting each other, and after all, we are human beings, and we have a different perspectives to life, and this is awesome. This is really what makes us different and unique.
learning. What are some of the other elements that you've learned, either personal learnings, intellectual learnings? It sounds like you've had some hot conversations, some cool conversations, and a lot of learning. What were some of those points?
I've learned some pretty amazing Arabic.
You learned some pretty amazing Arabic.
I learned a little bit of baseball.
A little bit about baseball.
Yes, tried very hard to explain. Go Red Sox tonight, but trying very hard to explain baseball.
I think
Really.
for me it was how both countries are trying to found a function democracy. We came here after the shutting down, and for a second we were like, "Wow, you have this as well here." And we were astonished with the fact that there's some groups that doesn't go to vote, because in Egypt, when people try to set example, they would say that, well, in the US, everyone votes.
Yeah.
And for me, that from our colleagues was astonishing to know that everyone still have a little bit of issues with the house rates, with all of this. I think that it made it a little bit realistic for us, which was great.
I was going to say, when we first went to Egypt in June, I was thinking about, just to myself, thinking in my head about some of the assumptions that may have been made about Americans, that we were all wealthy or life was easy here and we were ranked number one in education and healthcare and everything, and that those realities are simply false. Yeah. And that we are imperfect, we always have been, and I'm sure always will be, as humanity itself is imperfect. But I think to discover that in the daily life of young people in Egypt, they've been going through a literal revolution, a revolution in a sense that's not just about weapons of war or trying to change a system of government, but an internal struggle trying to build a new future for their country. And as Americans, we only know that in history books in our own country. And the fact, too, that our nation is so young. I always grew up as a huge fan of American history and an ardent student of it. And going to the oldest civilization in the world and seeing the discoveries that have been made in science and engineering and architecture and literature and the arts, breathtaking, and even more than I anticipated that it would be. And seeing that how far nations and civilizations come, and then the dark days come. But I think we're hopeful that the lightness beyond the darkness is there at some point.
What I have learned that no cooperation could exist without understanding. And for understanding, there must be a conversation. And I'm surprised that I found some politicians, whether in the Middle East or in the US, are giving advocacy to the governments about the mutual relations between both countries, and they have never been there before. This is really weird, because giving consultations about the situation on the Middle East without going to the Middle East is something not acceptable, and will not reach good results. And this happened to us personally when we are handling the discussions and the topics. And the clear proof of this is that we are now having 6 projects. And it's all because of understanding and conversation.
One final question, then we'll open it up to our fellow panelists here. There are certainly a number of policymakers in this room here. What would you want to tell these policymakers? One is, if you're going to make decisions about Egypt, go there first. That's what I hear you saying. Other points that you would like to get across to those who do have substantial influence in this room?
I would like to say that when you are about to take a decision, think of the numbers and the figures in front of you as humans, as lives, and as a potential kind of partners for you. And I think that only will solve a lot of problems.
If I have one advice, I would say think about exchange one day of your life with someone, just an ordinary man walking on the streets, and give yourself a chance to experience the struggles and the problems of the daily life of every human being.
I would just say that the rest of the world is watching. That became abundantly clear. And every move the U.S. makes has ripples far beyond the political infighting in D.C. That would sort of be my biggest takeaway, is we all get caught up in the politics of it and in the details of it, but really the decisions that are made in the city really just do have repercussions around the world. and just to keep that in mind would be good.
I'd say that the world is enough for all of us, and the planet resources are enough for all of us. So it is not the story of you, of me or you. It's you and me. Win-win relations will sustain, and win-loss relations will lead to the loss for everyone.
I would just ask them to set a model of real democracy and to give us a chance to say or to express whether this is good for us or not. Because as Beth said, that each single decision affects the whole world around. So the world looks at so many places in the world, and America is maybe the most of them. So every single decision affects everywhere else on this planet.
Reactions. I'm sure you have some.
Well, first of all, this is just a wonderful gathering, and I thank my friend Shafiq and Jihan for putting this together. Because if there's one thing that we have a shortage of, it's precisely this kind of interaction, person to person, and only good things can come from this. The second thing is, as I was listening to the fellows speaking, I was thinking, we had a story on the front page. I just came from Singapore actually a few hours ago, so if I say the wrong thing, don't hold it against me. Okay. But because I don't remember what day I read this story. In fact, I don't remember what day it is. But it was a front page story we had, and it was an interview with Susan Rice, and it was about that the sort of national security team had met at the White House, and they decided on a new Middle East policy or dealing with the key countries, and one of them being Egypt. And I was looking down the roster of the meeting, and I realized that none of those people had actually lived in the Middle East. I don't think there was anyone at the meeting who spoke Arabic, had lived in the Middle East. I mean, maybe they've had hummus once, but I mean, it was just like, it struck me that that was a pretty big call by people who have actually never lived in a place with any for any length of time. I loved what Noah said about diversity, and that really is our strength. And unfortunately, we sometimes forget that, that our motto is e pluribus unum. Let me just say, make one broader kind of architectural point that be interested to get the fellows to react to and to share with them the perspective that I bring to this story, which is that if you don't wake up every morning as a country, whether you're called Egypt or the United States of America or Singapore, where I've just come from, and China, if you don't wake up every morning asking the first most fundamental question, what world am I living in? And how do I enable more of my people to thrive in that world? Countries that don't think about the future tend not to do well there. And unfortunately, we've kind of gotten away as a country from really asking that question, what world are we living in? And there were things that were said here today which really pick up on that. Well, I think we're actually not in a world of developed and developing countries. I like to say that's a very round world. And I don't think that actually is the divide in the world we're going into. I actually think the big divide in the world is going to be between what I call HIEs and LIEs. High imagination enabling countries and low imagination enabling countries. High integration enabling countries and low integration enabling countries. And I think for our Egyptian friends here and for us as Americans, we really need to think about how we fit in on that spectrum. So let me explain a little bit more. What do I mean by high imagination enabling? Well, we actually live in a world today where, and this is why Noah's point is so important about diversity. We live in a world today where actually, if I just have the spark of an idea now, if I just have a spark of an idea, I actually can go to a company in Taiwan, Delta, they'll actually design that for me. I can skip over to Hangzhou and Alibaba and my friend Jack Ma, who runs Alibaba. He'll actually line up 30 cheap Chinese manufacturers to make that for me. I can then jump over to Seattle, Amazon.com. My buddy Jeff Bezos, he'll do my fulfillment and delivery and gift wrap it for my friend Shafiq for Christmas or for the Eid. Freelancer.com. I can go to actually Craigslist to find my accountant, and Freelancer.com will get someone to do my logo for $19.95 unless someone bids $18.95. They're all commodities now. What isn't a commodity is this. Because the days when Ford Motor are going to come to your town in Egypt or in Minnesota, where I'm from, with a factory of 25,000 jobs, those days are over. That factory is now 2,500 robots and 250 people. So we need 7 people creating jobs for 20. We need 20 creating jobs for 50. We need 14 creating jobs for 100, whether in Egypt or in America. And that comes from people doing this all the time. And the first thing you really need to understand is, in the world we're going into, you better be constructing your society in a way that maximizes the ability of everyone to do that. Because the day when you can get a job at the Mugama or you can get one at the Ford Motor Factory, I've worked at the New York Times for 33 years. The chances of my 2 girls working anywhere for 33 years is 0. So, to tie this back to our conversation, one of the places you really get a lot of that is through diversity. A lot of different people rubbing up against each other from a lot of different perspectives. And it is, Noah picked up on the most important thing we have, e pluribus unum, out of many one, but out of many, all of these ideas. Steve Jobs' father came from Syria. Where would Syria today? He invented the personal computer in Syria. Where would it be? We are such the beneficiary that all these people came to our country. So high imagination enabling is really important, and that's a really complicated thing. And it's something we constantly struggle with, how we nurture high imagination. But I think it's going to be a great challenge for Egypt in the decades going forward. And what I'm always struck by is, I was in Tahrir Square for the revolution, and people said to me, "What did you see there?" And everyone saw different things. I saw many people, young people in particular, living in what I call a flat world. That is, seeing how everybody else was living and realizing they were not living in a context that allowed them to realize their full potential. And nothing creates revolution more than young people living in a context that doesn't enable, empower, and nurture them to realize their full potential, to do this, this, and that. One of the things that's always impressed me about Egypt is the incredible human talent there. And if I ever were to write the I don't want to get too political here, but if I ever were to write the indictment of the ancien regime, it would not be about money or corruption or all that. I think there wasn't a... I think the real indictment was the soft bigotry of low expectations about their own people. There's nothing worse than a regime that does not believe in the true potential of its own young people, men and women. So that really gets to the other I, and that's high integration enabling. Because it's not enough anymore to be just high imagination enabling. You also have to be integration enabling in the sense of the laws you have, how you connect up with the world, how you connect up with your neighbors. And I think the challenge for this generation of Egyptians in particular is, we all know the Middle East as a region doesn't trade. Holland, trades more than the entire Arab world together. And that kind of integration, making yourself connectable with other countries in a highly hyper-connected world, I think is going to be more important than ever. So, as I look at the Egyptian scene in which our friends here are the future that seems to be shaping up there, there can be no opportunity, no ability to realize your full potential without order. Okay. I really appreciate that, and I understood why the events unfolded there the way they did since June 30th and have been personally quite understanding of that. Order is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You got to have order plus. It's got to have a positive slope. If I would have a critique of the ancien regime, is that it was order that lapsed into really inertia, and inertia that lapsed into decay. Egypt needs order, but it needs order plus. It needs order with a vision and an imagination that says we really do have incredible human potential and we can unleash it on the world and on our own future. So I think I just stop there before I get in real trouble.
And I have many more questions, but the topic, the focus is on understanding and mutual understanding. We have, in a sense, the next generation and the generation that is in significant power right now, represented by yourself as an example.
I'm not in power anywhere.
No, but I actually think you have tremendous power. I think you're much more than just an observer of the world. I think that the work you do, the writing, it's
that's not important, but whatever.
the fun you do, it has a substantial impact on the policy conversations, on the thinking. There is a constructed element. My question is about you personally. And maybe this is too much after jet lag from China, Singapore. But how do you go about trying to understand those? You've traveled the world. You've interviewed people at all levels around the world. It's a very unique position you've been in. How do you personally walk into a situation and try to understand?
Well, that's a really, really good question. Next question, please. I'd say a couple things. One is young people often come to me and say, I want your job. I want to do what you do. What do I need to know? And I always tell them that first you got to be able to type fast. I can really type fast. And got to know good English and grammar, proper English and grammar, to say the least, just to correct myself. And good to know some history, some politics, some sociology, some economics, philosophy, literature. All those are really important. But there's actually only one thing you have to know to do this job really well. And that's that you have to like people. You have to really enjoy hearing the music of their lives, their passions, aspirations, the crazy things they say and do. And if you like people, you will always be successful as a journalist. It's amazing to me how many journalists hate people. It's always been a real mystery to me. Because if you can't hear the music, you can never play the music. So first of all, I really like people. Secondly, I always tell young people that the key to being, I think, a successful journalist, especially if you're covering the Middle East, you have to understand the Middle East, as a journalist or a columnist for any major news organization, everyone wants to own you. And if they can't own you, they want to destroy you. There's no one who puts their arm around you, Arab, Israeli, Shiite, Sunni, Kurd, Turkmen, whoever, and says, Tom, I really appreciated that critical article. We really needed that. We're going to take that to heart. We really, really want to thank you for that. So you got to be tough-minded, you know. You better, and that means you got to do your homework, know what you're saying, why you're saying it. But the third thing that is, I think, just the sine qua non of being a successful journalist in the Middle East is that you have to be a good listener. You know, I'm a little Jewish guy from Minneapolis, but I've been covering the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Arab world for a lot of years, 33 for the New York Times. And listening is so important for two reasons. First of all, what you learn when you listen to people. You actually, when you actually listen to people, and I don't mean just wait for them to stop talking, but when you actually listen to people, it's amazing what you'll learn. And the second, and actually much more important thing, is that listening is a sign of respect. I've always found that you sit down and actually, whatever the group is, and if you actually listen to people, it's amazing what they'll let you say back. Anyone who knows my coverage for all these years, I'm not. You're all wonderful. You're all great. That's just great. It's all the Arabs' fault, all the Jews' fault. You know, that is not my thing. But I'd like to think that everyone in the region, and the reason I survived as long as I did, does know one thing. I really do want them to succeed. And if people smell you want them to succeed, it's amazing what you can say to them. But if they smell you don't want them to succeed, and we had an administration before this that gave off that smell, you can't tell them the sun is shining. And people can smell that from 100 paces, whether you really want them to succeed. And so that's certainly what's done me, well as a journalist, and that's really how I operate. So
it's pretty good on jet lag. No, thank you. And Jim, we've put Jim as the capstone, the ending of our conversation here, for multiple reasons. Jim, first of all, you have the scholarly background as well as the practical background, thinking carefully about East-West relations. And secondly, you've also worked closely with the fellows. Your thoughts?
He has jet lag. I have a cold. I'd rather have the jet lag, Tom. I hope it's not too annoying that I've got this raspy voice. One of the fellows told me it gave me gravitas. I'm not quite sure that's true. Right on to what you said about listening, absolutely the critical factor in all of this. Real meeting is always learning. All too often the meeting doesn't become a real meeting in that you're not open to the other person to really listen and hear what they say. My mom used to tell me all the time, if you want someone to hear you, listen to them first. Otherwise, you're talking at them and not to them. And I think these fellows learned that here and in Egypt as well. And in my just watching them interact with each other, I saw people who, as I think Beth said it, they fought a little bit, but I think they respect each other, and that's important. One of the things, Shafiq, about this program that matters so much to me is I'll never forget that picture of Bill Clinton at 16 going to Boys Town and coming to shake the hand with the president. It was a transformative moment in the life of a young person. Gave them a sense of self. I look at so many of the programs that we do in MEPI, some of the State Department programs that bring people here and send our young people abroad. They're transformative moments like that. This program, Shafiq, is one of those moments. I brought the fellows to Lafayette Park, which is where I sit most days and do my writing. Not because I wanted them just to see the White House the way I see it, but to see the people see the White House. And to hear the many languages in the park. And know that this is an incredibly diverse place where people come and see the building and get excited when they see it. They're going to go to the building on Friday and get briefings from White House administration officials. I hope it becomes a transformative moment for them. I hope it's a sense that they'll come away with that. And from hearing them talk so far, I think it has given them, as was said, a sense of self. I can do this. I've learned something. I've learned something about myself, about my capacity to engage in another culture, and know that I actually can make a difference in my own life and in the life of others. So a program like this can be important that way. And the projects that they've developed have given me a sense that we haven't seen the end of these folks yet. I mean, they're going to be doing great things. And a moment like this could be helpful. I want to say one thing. The project comes at a very critical time. When I look at the polling, they've never been as bad. Egyptian understanding of America at an all-time low, and Americans' understanding of Egypt at an all-time low. We do not appreciate or understand each other, largely because we don't know each other. And so we see each other in one-dimensional stereotype. America is the all-powerful, insensitive louts that we appear to be to many around the world. And they're seen one-dimensionally, too, as maybe more violent than us, more just basically different and not quite the same. Experiences like this transform that and create a a rounded sense of not just yourself, but of the other. America is the diverse place that's welcoming. America is the place where we've got young people looking for jobs too. It's a place where we have a dysfunctional government, so what does that say? And in the polling we do when we ask Egyptians what they want most, their political priorities, they say a job, good education, and health care. Sound familiar? It's because they're people. If I learned anything in my work in academic life and my work since then, it's that we're one species. We all want the same things. We all need the same things. We all need to understand each other as being the same. And projects like this make it happen. I mentioned MEPI. What I loved about what this program does is it's privately funded. And there ought to be more corporations stepping up and doing the same thing. We benefit from our interaction with the world, but we don't always understand the importance of knowing the world and helping others know the world. And I think what I hope comes out of it is you have 5,000 from you, but I hope that there are 5,000 American corporations and Egyptian companies that come forward and say, we want to do it too. And Saudi companies and Algerian and Lebanese, et cetera. I mean, I think we need more of this citizen diplomacy because the world's getting too small and our knowledge of each other is too limited. And so we make way too many mistakes because we just don't understand and we don't have the respect. And I want to talk about the projects now.
Let's move to Q&A.
Let's go.
Oh, great. So we have about 10 minutes for question and answer with the panelists here, let's say the full set of panelists, as well as the other fellows who are sitting east and west over here.
Rather than what you agreed on, I'd like to hear what you disagreed on. When you talked about you had a lot of disagreements. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Fabulous. So there's the commonality, the agreement. Where's the disagreement? Yes, please.
My name is Mohammed Shinawi, the Voice of America. How would that project encounter or overcome bashing of the United States on a daily basis in the Egyptian media and the anti-American sentiment that's on the rise?
Great. And I saw right behind you now.
My name is Janan Shita. I'm an Egyptian student at Georgetown University. I believe that one of the biggest obstacles to building this bridge between the East and the West is the faulty and misleading media and journalism in our world today, especially for those who don't have access to a solid education. So how would you recommend both those in the journalistic realm and those not in the journalistic realm avoid having media draw a wedge between the East and the West?
Let's start with the first of the questions. This might be the most dangerous, although media can be pretty dangerous too. What were some of the points of disagreement? Where were the points of tension between you and your fellows?
My name is Alex Goldmark. I'm from New York City, and I'm a public radio reporter at WNYC radio station. As for differences, we decided to have a sit-down, self-moderated discussion where we could just bring these up. A bunch got put up on a board, and we actually voted to discuss how gender and gender roles were treated differently in different societies, how race, how homosexuality was, and premarital sex. I can say that of the 20 fellows, only 2 of us are married, 1 American and 1 Egyptian. But if you then break it down, most of the Americans are with boyfriends or girlfriends, living with them. Most of the Egyptians are not in a committed relationship. So we discussed, what's that like? How do you find a mate? How do you find a life partner if you maybe are in a culture where it's not okay to try living together first? I wouldn't say that we got in a disagreement over that, like we didn't respect each other, but it was very illuminating to just hear how we had totally different paths to trying to get to the same goal.
I would also say we do have some foreign policy discussions that are pretty interesting. We had a couple today, and it's amazing how much you can get out in an elevator and then back down again. But it's really the perception of sort of, it's a different understanding of what's going on both sides. And I think it really is, again, having those conversations. Really, I have a guy I fight with all the time about this stuff. And it's been so educational, and it definitely has changed my ways and how I look at things and my understanding of it incredibly. But we'll continue to fight.
You know, as important as
improving Egyptian-American relations is an understanding, and I really think it's important. It is no less important, and maybe more important right now, to improve Egyptian understanding. Some of you may have been at the Middle East Institute's conference 5 or 6 weeks ago, where I moderated a panel between a Christian Egyptian woman, a secular politician, someone from the Salafist An-Nur party, and someone from the Muslim Brotherhood. And one of the things that's been so obvious in all the Arab awakenings is that one of the legacies of these authoritarian regimes is that the people did not know each other. Okay, Muslim Brotherhood was shocked at how many Salafists there were. Secularists were shocked at how many they were. People didn't know each other. This region needs a weekend retreat. I mean, these people really, there's a deep, deep lack of understanding. And whatever disagreements the panelists and the fellows here have had, they pale to the deep lack of understanding within these societies. And I think to go forward, to be HIEs and LIEs, it's certainly necessary to improve that sort of understanding of the world and outside and have that, but it is just as vital. I hope Shafiq will consider doing this inside Egypt for Egyptians, because there are far too opportunities, I think, for the people of these countries to rediscover one another and develop that. If they want to be that kind of sense of pluralism and out of many one, I'm glad they admire it in us. We've been working on it for 250 years. And it's been a real struggle. And we're still, read our press, we work on it every day, that effort at pluralism. You know, on the one hand, we praise ourselves. We have twice elected a black man whose middle name is Hussein, whose grandfather was a Muslim who defeated a woman in order to run against a Mormon. Okay? I mean, that's like pretty cool. And I'm really proud of that. But anyone who's followed the politics of the last, bit, and I won't name names, Tea Party. If you don't think racial prejudice is also playing out here right now, just the opposite of what we have taken pride in, then you aren't paying attention. There are people, for whom the issues of the day now are 80% race and the other 20% are race.
Actually, me personally, and as an outcome from this fellowship, I am having a project that I will implement in Egypt directly after I'm back, which is a national conversation thing.
Bless your heart.
I wish I could make some benefits out of it for my society, from my country, from what I have learned here. Small addition.
The last of the two questions about media. So one, what to do with bashing within the media, and secondly, in a sense, how to avoid identity politics. And Jim, can I throw that in your direction? If I recall correctly, you for 18 years headed up a program called Viewpoint, based out of Abu Dhabi, and focused on these kinds of issues. How do you think about media as a tool for bringing people together, aligning with the spirit and practice of this project?
That certainly would be the best use of media. But we have the opposite. We have media that polarizes, media that locks people in. In a world in which there are so many options to become informed, people sort of self-select and choose media that mostly reinforces their biases and prejudices. And I think there's not enough attention paid to the other. Tom, one of the reasons why I insist on buying the newspaper and holding it in my hands is because it gives you a chance to have to look at everything, even if it's just the headlines. But when you go online, you tend to just go to the story that you want to read. Very good. That basically is the story that tells you what you want to know already. And I've done too many of those shows, which I just don't do anymore, where the host asks the question, don't you agree with this? And when you don't, he says, that's not the answer I was looking for, and then goes to the next guest. Too much of that and not enough of the other. And I think that I love Bassem Youssef. I think he's marvelous. We had him at our conference last year, Gibran, and he's a marvelously entertaining person who educates a whole culture much in the same way that Jon Stewart does and Stephen Colbert do. And I took note in the paper today that he might be being pressed again because of his challenging ideas. I think we have to get over that on both sides. We have to have the sense that we're not only willing to entertain the opposite point of view, but we're willing to respect it and willing to engage it. I think that's a marvelous project that you're talking about doing. When we do our polls, I've come to use the shorthand red state, blue state. There's a red state, blue state in Iran. There's a red state, blue state in Israel. There's one in Egypt. There's one in Lebanon. And we're not always the best here at healing the divide, as we just saw from the dysfunction that we witnessed a couple weeks ago and is still playing out in different ways. But certainly all of us collectively need this internal national conversation. Media ought to facilitate it. It doesn't. And I think we need all of us to figure out ways to challenge that because it's more often the problem than a solution.
I'd simply say that one of the things that's great about, I think, this fellowship and this opportunity, just listening to everybody, is that it's really important as a journalist to, I think, put yourself into uncomfortable situations with uncomfortable audiences. I just debated Mehdi Hassan in June at the Oxford Union Debating Society on Al Jazeera. And the subject on the table is America a force for good in the world? And I took the affirmative. And if I don't know what got into me, but I deliberately like to put myself in those uncomfortable situations to see how I do, to see whether I can answer the hard questions. I think it's really important. That's what's great about this. I'm glad they're arguing and disagreeing. Because one of the things that's happened with what Jim talked about, and I've had the pleasure of being a guest on Jim's show several times, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed talking to a different audience and having him challenge me. But what's happened because of what he's talked about, the narrowcasting of the media, is that politicians and journalists lose their ability to persuade. That's so dangerous. I mean, you go on Fox TV now, and the hardest question, if you're a Republican, you'll get is, just how bad is Obamacare? That's like a hard question. You know what I mean? And if you're a liberal on MSNBC, it'll be the same thing. And so what happens is, once everybody falls into that, everybody loses the ability to actually persuade anybody. And Jon Stewart did a riff last night. I was watching, it's on the web today about how he was criticizing CNN, but I'm not picking on them, but where they had guests on and they just asked them, General Assisi, good or bad? I don't know. I mean, it's just, anything. Is it good or bad? Well, things don't fall into that. Maybe we should actually analyze this and think about it. So that's what's considered now being centrist. You don't take a position. You just force someone else to say black or white in the world. And so people lose the ability to persuade. That's a really, really dangerous thing. And the great thing about, I think, programs like this is when you're in a bus in Cairo traffic for 2 hours, you can't just walk out. Okay, well, you could, but you'd be crazy. You could have to persuade that person across the seat or across the aisle, and that's a really good instinct to nurture.
Great point. And I said final point, but we're here to listen and learn. Please.
Hi, my name is Mohammed Mubarak. I'm an architect from Egypt, and I'm privileged to be here today. I would like to answer the questions about the media. Actually, my answer is just for 2 words: personal interactions. Through personal interactions, we can overcome what's happening in the media. And I hope that you will see how we can implement this approach to overcome the media coverage and media problems in our action projects. I remember that the discussions we had during this fellowship, whether in Egypt or here in the United States, it's just the core value of this fellowship is in the intercultural dialogue and the discussions we had. We can understand how similar we are, and at the same time we appreciate how different we are. And I think that Beth was actually talking about me because we had so many discussions before. But honestly, we never had a fight before because I barely can understand her. So maybe it might be a solution. Yeah. So I think it's about how we bring people together, and this fellowship is a very important step towards bringing and bridging the gaps between East and West. Thank you.
So at this point, we're going to transition a little bit. I had mentioned that you're going to get a sneak preview of 6 fascinating projects. So part of what intrigues me, really impresses and ultimately inspires, is that this program is not just, and I'm not a part of this program, by the way, formally at least, the fellowship program, but as an outsider, part of what inspires me about this program is that it's not just about understanding, it's about action as well. And so these fellows, there are about approximately 20 fellows, and they were, well, actually, Jim, you'll be able to put forward the details of it, but they combined into 6 different groups, each group with some Egyptians and Americans. And what they produced, I think you will agree with me, demonstrates the combined power of both dialogue and creativity. Jim?
I'm not going to say much. I want to turn the program over to the fellows. And the first one we'll do is Reperception, which is Jeff Walls and Miriam Ibrahim. Come on forward.
Great.
Sincere thanks to everyone who's with us tonight, and of course to Mr. Gaber. As Dr. Zaghi mentioned, my name is Jeff Walls. I'm joined by Miriam Ibrahim, and we have a third member of our action project group, Heba Safat, over there in the wings. When asked about his approach to art making, the Egyptian painter Assam Maroof remarked, "I see art as universal. It is not a cultural statement, it is a human story." Maroof was born in Cairo, has studied in Rome, and works in Amsterdam. He's a citizen of the world, and his work operates across cultural divides. We are designers and artists. We believe that creative expression possesses a powerful ability to communicate ideas and emotions in a manner that transcends restrictive definitions of culture. We are also Gaber Fellows, and we seek to push forward the discourse between East and West, beyond narrow definitions of what it means to be Egyptian or American, Arab or Westerner, and towards an understanding of each other as human beings possessing minds and souls united in a common purpose, the pursuit of equality, security, opportunity, and understanding. The inaugural edition of the Gaber Fellowship has provided us as a group and as individuals with an amazing opportunity to gain insight into the dynamics of cultural understanding. We have deepened our ability to be responsible, informed, and passionate communicators and ambassadors between cultures. As we have traveled across our respective countries, we have sought to formulate new and expanded concepts of intercultural discourse. We seek a rejuvenated approach to a dialogue at risk of failure. We have been investigating art's place in this dialogue, and we have come to understand that when an artist travels to a new culture, they are listening, playing the role of observer, and the place in which they find themselves is speaking, sometimes in shouts and sometimes in whispers. In turn, they reply through their art. This is the nature of the dialogue. In the spirit of the work of generations of artist-travelers, from the Orientalist painters of the 19th century, whose work played an essential part in the inspiration for the Gaber Fellowship, through current examples, we seek to establish a sustainable artist-in-residence exchange and exhibition series between Egypt and America that will enrich the cultural explorations of the Gaber Fellowship and deepen its current partnership network to include an even more varied array of arts and cultural institutions in both countries.
So our program is about an exchange that will involve 6-week residency programs for a small, carefully selected group of artists who work in different mediums, including photography, film, creative writing. It would encourage participating artists to immerse themselves fully in the river of daily life in their new homes, acting as embedded citizen artists and opening their eyes, ears, and minds to the new experience. At the conclusion of the 6 weeks, the artists will have created a body of work that supports the missions of the fellowship and their host institutions, and will be exhibited alternately in the United States and Egypt, providing an opportunity for scholars, policymakers, creatives, the public at large to share the experience and learnings of these artists. We're confident that with the appropriate scope and resources, this project will help cultivate a new and vibrant dialogue, a dialogue between the East and West, a dialogue of collaboration and shared experience, of understanding and compassion, simply spoken from one human being to another. Thank you.
Next up is Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez and Ahmed Al-Habibi. Their project is called Digitized Comic Book Beyond Exceptionalism, East, West, and the Ties That Bind. And as a comic book aficionado, I take special delight in this. Come on up, guys.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. As has come up several times before during this night, and as you will continue to hopefully see, the program that Shafiq and Jim managed to put together really has made the best out of diversity. Not just diversity because there were 10 Egyptian fellows and 10 American fellows, but diversity because we all came from a vast array of different backgrounds, life experiences, and viewpoints about the world. We sought through our project to find potential synergies based on where we were, what our experiences had been, and what our strengths were. Beth is an international relations specialist and a masterfully artful communicator. Amr is a human rights activist. I specialize in comparative constitutional law and am a professor. And Ahmed Al-Habibi, my friend and colleague, is a dynamic, brilliant young artist working in Egypt today. So we sought to put all of this together into a project that would be didactic, that would be communicative, and that would help us reach an audience that we think is growing incredibly important as time goes on, which is the youth. As we've seen in Egypt over the last 5 years, and increasingly in the United States and elsewhere, youth movements have become a strong mover of change. Many times, this youth is the driving force behind what changes, but often they lack a lot of the vocabulary and a lot of the ideas and a lot of the education to really have a seat at the table afterwards and make their case for what it is that the next generation truly wants. So what we hope to do is to start a series of comic books that will use parallel narratives to express some of these themes. And comic books have become a more and more accepted and successful part of the sort of global communication infrastructure in recent years. We've had the success of Mouse, of Persepolis. Even the 9/11 Commission did a comic book version of its own findings because for thousands of years, from pyramid art to PowerPoint, images can communicate what otherwise takes several pages of text to swallow. And a lot of times, the youth who are leading these movements don't really have time. So the person who can best explain the importance of comic books is my friend Ahmed, who will tell you a little bit about the important role that comic books and visual art play in Egypt.
Before the first wave of the revolution in 2011, a man named Magdi Shafi'i published one of the most controversial comic books in the Egyptian history. It was called Metro. Metro was about a young man taking a stand against a corrupted government. It was criticizing the regime. A few days later, this comic book was banned. It was not available in any bookstore in Egypt. Why would it be banned? Simply because this medium, comic books, are a powerful medium that even the government is scared of. After the first wave of the revolution, Egypt was in turmoil. And if publishing a comic book in a stable country is a risk, what do you think it would be if the country was in turmoil? However, some comic book artists decided to take a leap of faith, driven by the very same dream of other Egyptians who marched the streets of Egypt, seeking change, willing to make a difference. They decided to publish their own comic books, and guess what? It made it to the bestsellers list.
We view comic books as not only a way of forcing change and of complaining about the status quo, but also as a way of informing the youth about a lot of the ideas that they wouldn't necessarily have access to otherwise. Our first comic, which we are presenting today, explores the parallel creations of the United States Constitution, the world's oldest, and the 2012 Egyptian Constitution, which lasted 9 months and was one of the world's shortest. Since almost every country has a constitution, there's a lot of information about what works and what doesn't. And we want to be able to make that information accessible to the people who are going to have a seat at the table so that they can better help to define their own future. In closing, I wanted to say that we also hope that by inviting thought leaders, academics, and others to give their own voices and lend their own ideas to future projects, we can find other ways to make themes like gender rights, minority rights, more accessible and universal, because a country's problems are no longer just its own. Everybody's in this together. As I believe Jim pointed out, the youth all want the same thing around the world, and it's a matter of learning to communicate it. Thank you.
And Shafiq, you'll be pleased to know that an Egyptian daily paper has offered Ahmed to do a comic strip based on the visit. The only thing that I asked for was a little more hair when they did. And Daniel wanted to make sure his jaw got squared like a superhero. Next is Alex Goldmark and Mohammed Mubarak on a project that I find absolutely fascinating called Shared Distance.
Hello, everyone. As he said, my name is Alex Goldmark. This is my friend, Mohammed Mubarak. And our third teammate is Noha Eid. Our project is Shared Distance.
Well, according to recent polls done by the Arab American Institute, perceptions of both sides of Egypt and the United States are increasingly negative. When you ask an everyday American what you think about Egypt, the answers are always like pyramids, sphinx, and desert. And I have personally experienced this during my living in the UK when I met some people who actually think that we as Egyptians walk in the streets like this.
Yeah. Pharaohs, it's a real stereotype. And this is what we want to combat with our project. And we want to do it by giving more people the same kind of experience that we had in our fellowship, which is to erase a stereotype and replace it with a personal interaction and a personal connection.
So here's our idea to achieve this. Shared Distance. It's an interactive public art installation. Think of it as a window between the worlds. Imagine that you're going by your day, walking in a shopping mall, a park, or a university food court, and you see this screen and it grabs your attention. You see someone waving to you from the other part of the world. You may wave back. You may walk up to the screen and join your new friend in a simple activity.
I'm getting overexcited already. The activities could be a puzzle that both sides have to team up and collaborate on to solve, or they could be exchanging messages or asking questions, simple or complicated.
Or you can even keep going, but you will always know that there is a window to Egypt in your shopping mall. Your interactions could be as simple as looking at an Egyptian in the eye and share a smile, or as complicated as signing up to become pen pals with the person who you just gave him an intercontinental high five.
We got to do it. Okay, but it doesn't end at a high five. Of course, we'll capture these interactions and we'll disseminate them on a website that will be designed to allow the participants to keep in touch with the project and with each other, and for us to spread the results more widely. The machines themselves will tour around to different universities, or they could go in other public squares like that, spreading the message more widely. And we feel it has the potential to even become a business. Imagine that you sit down for a cup of tea, and you look across the table, and you can see someone in another country, in a cafe where every table is a window across the world.
It's just a very simple idea, but it continues to evolve. Thank you.
We look forward to your questions.
Thanks, guys. And next comes Leslie Lang and Amr Ismail, healthy innovation by empowering cross-cultural solutions. This one is also quite fascinating.
As Mr. Gaber requested, ahlan wa sahlan, masa al khair. I'd like to begin by introducing our colleagues, Ahmed Nagy, Haroon Habib, myself, Leslie Lang, and Amr Ismail.
Well, we believe that humans come in all colors, all races, all kind of beliefs. Some love Red Sox, others hate the Red Sox. For me, I try to understand what is the Red Sox. But we all share one thing in common, that we all would like to live a long, healthy life.
So chronic disease, aka the silent killer, is the #1 killer around the world. This is true for both the developed and the developing world. Specifically for diabetes, Egypt ranks amongst the top 10 countries with the highest rates of diabetes. The United States, on the other hand, ranks amongst the top 10 countries with the highest number of diabetics. So what is the world doing about this?
In 2011, the UN held a conference to address the issue. A lot of other international organizations are trying to find a solution for this problem since it affects both the wealthy and the poor. But what, as individuals, can we do?
So tonight I'd like to tell you about what one young man did about this. This young man, the son of an Arab father and a Jewish mother, whose grandmother passed away of diabetes in the West Bank. He asked himself why individuals in under-resourced communities have to die of preventable, manageable diseases. As a result, he developed the microclinic model, a model in which communities share access to basic healthcare technologies, health education, and social support. The model was so successful that it spread across the Middle East, Africa, and finally to the southern United States, which also shares in an epidemic crisis in chronic disease, diabetes, and obesity. So for our action project, we now want to pilot the program in Egypt. And the unique aspect of this program is that we will be incorporating a cross-cultural aspect in which communities in Kentucky will facilitate in the development and implementation of the program in Egypt. The question was asked earlier, how do we counteract this anti-American sentiment? And I think Dr. Zogby had the answer to this, which is in both countries, one of the top 3 concerns is health. Furthermore, I think Motez had mentioned that unemployment, he was surprised that unemployment is a huge problem in the United States as it is in Egypt. Well, this epidemic, diabetes, is a common enemy and a common challenge that will bring communities together in a cross-cultural understanding. Furthermore, we not only want to empower individuals to affect their own health, we want to provide them with solutions to empower the communities to come up with solutions themselves. Therefore, we will also implement a social entrepreneurship program in which the microclinic communities in Egypt and in the United States will work together to develop innovative solutions for their health.
We can say that at the end of the day, we are all equal in love and debt and death. No one can help you with love. And we were hoping that you will help us in death. But we all can try to postpone death.
And tonight, we'd like to invite you to join us in this cross-cultural solution to this cross-cultural problem.
Thank you.
Tom, are you getting these are some of the, right? I'm never going to be able to look at that. Every time I watch that Seinfeld episode, I always think, when I hear this, I think of George Costanza. I'm now going to think of Tom Friedman in a much better way. Thank you. You bring together 20 really wonderful young people. You come up with a whole bunch of really creative ideas. The next is one that addresses a critically urgent need, and that is energy and water, and finds market solutions to the crisis. Morgan Williams and Mu'taz Hussein. Sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. It gives me honor and pleasure to stand in front of you all tonight carrying with me the glory of Tahrir Square and the will of the Egyptian people for a better future. However, our future is threatened by the energy and water shortage, especially when you know that Egypt must double its production of electricity by 2025, and that Egypt loses over 80% of its water resources because of the inefficient management on agriculture use only. Accordingly, the American fellows, Morgan Williams, Christina Fallon, and myself, started working on a project that provides market solutions to face the crisis in Egypt through building bridges between the American expertise and investments and the Egyptian potentials. For us, if we can say that in terms of national security, it is a crisis, but we see it as a potential investment opportunity for both countries in the US and Egypt. And my colleague Morgan will elaborate more about the idea itself. Thank you.
So what you're looking at here, if you haven't figured it out yet, is Egypt, and this is the Nile. And you'll find that, boy, that's a striking image. 99% of Egyptians are actually on the grid, but most of them live right within a few miles of the Nile. We're standing at the gates of the future. We're standing at the gates of the future, and it's up to us to really craft out the future that we want to have, that our generation wants to inhabit. And two of the things that really do limit everyone's ability to sustain local security, local sovereignty, and local stability are energy and water. So you've seen some of the highlights. Power crisis darkens outlook for Egypt. Water wars. Ethiopia's dam means crisis for Egypt. These are challenging things. They're hard. How do people address these things? 86% of the water is consumed by irrigating the fields inefficiently. As everyone is born in Egypt, that means the per capita water per person decreases. There's not more water coming. How are people going to sustain the economy? How are jobs going to be created in the future? How is our generation going to create the networks to have excitement and innovation and curiosity? And these are big issues. If we don't address energy and water, we're all in trouble. One of the opportunities that we see is that, one, Egypt is already committed to energy and water, and amazing things are happening. There have been commitments by the government to meet 20% of the Egyptian energy through renewables, and they're starting to do that. Just the other day, a cement power plant, about 50% of its energy consumption in Egypt was offset through the installation of a wind project. And these are real, tangible things that are happening. But one thing that really is not happening is that American companies are starting to really understand what opportunity exists in Egypt. And American companies aren't taking advantage of the opportunity and the opportunity for businesses to be diplomatic as opposed to waiting for our politicians to be diplomatic and building these ties. And I think Shafiq is testament to the ability for a businessman to really build some powerful connections. So what we're proposing to do is set up two very targeted high-level meetings. And these meetings will take the theme, one of energy and one of water. And what you'll find here is we're going to set the table. We're going to set the table with the right players from the West and the right players from Egypt to begin to really address some of the fundamental backlogs, why we're not actually doing this, and get some deal flow happening and get some diplomacy through the business handshake that will lead to more local, regional, and global stability. Because stability in Egypt is stability for us. Stability in Egypt is stability for the Egyptian people. And without addressing some of these things, without getting people together at the table, we'll never be able to work on these things together.
And our final project that actually is one of the ones that builds again on the experience of the partnerships that were developed and the need to expand it beyond just the 20 people who were here is Lead at Kallam, and it's Becca Doughton and Moga Morsi.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Monga Morsi from Cairo, talking on behalf of my team, Becca Doughton, Sali, and Reem Sulaiman. First, would love to extend our sincere thanks and appreciation to Mr. Gover for his vision, Dr. Zobi for believing and contributing to this extraordinary fellowship. So after living the such experience, we thought of what's next. So we thought, how or where will we continue the dialogue and expand it among others who didn't have the opportunity to live this fruitful experience? So we thought that currently there is no online space to provide this historical context between countries, bring people together to share their opinions and perspectives, engage in a civil discourse on Egypt and U.S. relationships. Therefore, we proposed the creation of an online platform that we named Lead Itkallem. Itkallem means talk in Arabic, and Lead stands for Learn, Express, Act, and Dialogue. Lead Itkallem will present a portal to continue the dialogue we started access to the public in both countries to communicate on a human level, a citizen-to-a-citizen interaction.
So Mocha just explained to us the vision for the program for Lead Itkallem. But how are we going to realize this? We're proposing a website with 4 distinct areas based on the acronym LEAD. The first part is Learn. This is where we'll have articles, opinion pieces, book reviews, book recommendations, and our signature piece, which is called Itkallem, which is going to be based on the TED Talks, this idea where we can share ideas about the East-West dialogue in short videos that people can experience, download, and watch. The second part is for the artists among us. It's called Express. That's where we're going to highlight different artists, musicians, writers, people who are using their art form to engage in this dialogue in a different way. So that's the Express portion. Also, people who talk about the struggles of artists in Egypt and the United States. The third part's pretty simple. It's Act. We're going to highlight the action projects we've heard here today. We have 5 amazing action projects. There's other projects happening in Egypt and the United States right now that we can also highlight on this part. The fourth part is the most important part. That's the dialogue. That's what we've been doing here as part of this fellowship. We've talked to some of the great leaders in the United States, great leaders in Egypt. We've heard from so many different people, and we've had dialogues amongst ourselves. We want to be able to share this with a greater world community, Americans and Egyptians who haven't had the opportunity to travel like we have. The dialogue piece will include online forums, Reddit Ask Me Anything discussions, opportunities to have Twitter feeds, a weekly poll, different opportunities for people to engage in the conversation, just like we've been doing through this fellowship in these weeks we spent in Egypt and we've spent in the United States. So those are 4 parts of a website. Who's going to be involved, where we can get the content, and who's going to go to the website? Well, so first of all, we want to say you guys are our first target. Not only to go to the website, but to be part of the experience and provide us with content. Writers, people who have opinion pieces, artists. We want your content, and we want you to record short videos. Shafiq, we hope you'll do a short video for us. But there's so many amazing opinion leaders here. We've had the opportunity to hear in this fellowship. We've had major people from media, economics, politics, from both sides. My goodness, we went to both the Republican and the Democratic strategy meetings and heard from very, very, very different opinions. But we wanted to share these. We heard from the Muslim Brotherhood when we were in Egypt. We've had the opportunity to meet with so many amazing people, and we want to share that with a much greater community. So that's the whole idea of our dialogue, and that's kind of where we're going to get our content in our first set of people who are going to go to the website. The second set are scholars, people who may be writing a book, might be writing a book report. It might be for school. It might be a scholar who wants to delve past the headlines into more substantive conversation information. And thirdly, people who want to engage in this dialogue just like we have. So that's the concept between Lead Itkallem. Moga at the beginning said to us, what's next? What's next with this fellowship? We can be passive readers of information, and we can actively engage in the conversation. We say what's next, Lead Itkallem. Thank you.
And unlike a couple of times when I had the great opportunity to teach at some wonderful universities, every day I'd stand humbled in front of the young people who I had to deal with. They could teach me much more than I was able to teach them. Shafiq, thank you for making all this possible. You brought a great group of people together, and you gave us an opportunity to learn from them as much as we were able to help them. Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you in a minute, but I want to thank Tom for coming. It was just wonderful that you made the effort, one, and two, you were incredibly coherent from 2 hours.
Later.
You were fantastic. Thank you. And of course, to the 20 young fellows, I see a very bright future for you, and I see an extraordinary set of opportunities that you've had, but I think you're going to do really wonderful things with them, and thank you so much for letting us be a part of your experience. Thank you. Dan?
So 3 quick points. One, a summary. It's always the most difficult part. To me, the biggest points I heard out of our conversation: recognize we are all human beings, and don't just sit on that fact. Do something about it. And to me, I was reminded one side note there. One of the mentors of my life, his name's Roger Fisher. He was a professor at Harvard Law School, passed away about a year ago. With Tom Friedman up here of the New York Times, I was reminded every morning when Roger Fisher would read the morning newspaper, the New York Times, he wouldn't just read it like he was watching television passively. He'd immediately be thinking, who can I offer advice to? And by 10 o'clock that morning, there'd be a letter out the door to many of you in this room. But I think that's the spirit I see and feel here with the fellows. Very much of, let's not just stay at the place of understanding, let's take action. The summary in short. Second, there's a surprise. And I ask the fellows to share this surprise with our group. Please.
On behalf of my all fellow program participants, I would like to present Mr. Shafiq Gabr with a small token of appreciation. We are all so proud to have taken part in this very unique program that seeks to improve understanding between East and West. At a time when this is extremely important for both, we have all learned so much and look forward to continuing to support this program in the future. The world needs more people who invest their time and energy to help build such a global understanding. Please accept this small gift from us.
And with that, would you please join me in giving a wonderful and warm thank you to all of our panelists and Mr. Shafiq Gabr.